Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we are going to talk through my thoughts on the Goodreads Choice Awards. There are so many things that I want to chat with you guys about with the Goodreads winners being out, and I'm going to categorize them so you guys can click on whatever timestamps you are interested in. The first thing that I will discuss with you guys is the results of the game that I created in my fantasy predictions video. We'll talk about that in just a minute. I will also talk about any upsets that I think Goodreads had this year, things that I wasn't expecting or things that I think people might be a little upset about. I will also talk about things that I am pleasantly surprised with. And then I also want to talk about numbers, just in general. How many votes things had, the differences in the categories, and who showed up for different things. I want to talk about some stats with you guys. So those are the things that we're going to talk about in this video. Once again, you are along for the ride with me. You can join me on all of these, or you can skip around to whatever you happen to be interested in. So first and foremost, I need to wrap up the game that I created in my fantasy predictions video, which if you didn't watch that video, just to let you know how the game worked, I predicted the top 20 fantasy books that were going to go on the long list for Goodreads, and I got a point for every book that I got correct. I also got a point for every book that I've got in the correct ranking of the top 10. And a half point if I was only one place off of that ranking. Now those points, the ranking, I hadn't collected yet because they were not in my reaction video. My reaction video that I did was just for the long list. So currently, out of the 20 I predicted, I got 14 right. And I was trying to beat 12. So I did already achieve my goal, but I want to see how many more points I'm going to gain and kind of what my goal will be for next year. I will put a link to my reaction video for the long list up in the cards and down in the description if you guys are interested in more of my thoughts of the top 20. I'm just gonna probably talk about the top 5 in this, and I'll go through really quickly some of the other ones that I got wrong because really my predictions were fairly accurate as far as rankings go within the top 5. But after that, I didn't do so hot. So first, we're just gonna start at the top place because why not? You guys already know what the list is. The top spot, the winner of the fantasy realm of Goodreads this year was Somewhere Beyond the Sea. This was a book by TJ Klune. This is the second book in The House for the Cerulean, or The House on the Cerulean Sea, The House in the Cerulean Sea, whatever that book is by TJ Klune. I think it's the second book in that series. And I was not expecting this to win. So this will also go in the upsets little category that I have. But yeah, so this I did not predict. I actually predicted this as the third spot, so I don't even get a half point for this. So that's interesting. The second spot went to The Familiar, which I have read, and I rated it 2 stars, and I was really hoping that it wasn't gonna win. And it didn't. So I am pleasantly surprised that it didn't win. And I'll talk a little bit more about my thoughts as far as why I think it's an upset in that category, but I am happy that it did not take the winning spot. Now, because I did guess that this was going to be number 1 and it's number 2, I'm only 1 place off, so I do get half a point for The Familiar. The third place winner is Emily Wilde's The Map of the Otherlands, which I said this was going to be number 2, so I am only 1 off, so I still get another half point. But I am a little shocked that this didn't do better than Somewhere Beyond the Sea, just because I have heard more about this series than House on the Cerulean Sea, but apparently not. Apparently the other series is more well known. The fourth winner for the Goodreads Choice Awards was The Book of Doors. I'm so excited that this made the top 5. I put this at number 5 on my list, so I do get half a point for this, but I really did not expect that to be the case. And so I am pleasantly surprised that this was as high. It got like 33,000 votes, I think, in the overall rankings. And I am glad that it made 4th place because it is an amazing book. If you haven't read it and you are a fan of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, I think that you should give it a try because it's very similar in vibe, different in story, but similar in vibe. And yes, I absolutely loved it. The 5th place winner was The Empire of the Damned. And this, I was so far off on my prediction. I just said that this was going to be in the top 20. I didn't even rank it in the top 10 because I didn't think it was going to make it. So I am impressed that it did. I am also excited because I am going to read the first book in the series, Empire of the Vampire, in January. So hopefully it's as good as everyone thinks it is. So those are the top 5 Goodreads winners. And really that is the only points that I have gained. So I gained half a point for The Familiar, a half a point for Emily Wilde's, and a half a point for The Book of Doors. So I only added 1.5 points to my 14 that I had originally. So my overall score for this year's game is a 15.5. If you watched my reaction video to the Goodreads long list, you know that I had read 6 of the, well, I think I'd read 5 of the fantasy, but now I've read The Familiar, so that's 6 of the fantasy books that were on the top 20 I had read. And out of the other ones that are on the list, at least for the ones that I had predicted were going to be in the top 10, I am interested in 3 of them. So that's a little sad to say that the rest of the list is just not of interest to me. Obviously, I'm interested in Empire of the Damned because I'm going to read the first book in the series, but that could be a lost cause if I don't like the first book. I'm also interested in The Lost Story. Megan Schaefer is just an author I would like to give a chance. And then I am curious about The Blackbird Oracle, but that's the 5th book in a series, and I've never read The Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness is the first book in the series, but I would like to, at some point, just give it a try. So those are the 3 I'm probably the most interested in from the list in general. Now, with that said, I did tell you guys that the game was going to end in some rewards for me if I were to beat my score. So my score was 12, I got 15.5. I definitely beat my record. But I haven't told you guys what my rewards will be. And unfortunately, I don't have anything to show you. I don't have any tangible items that I'm going to be like, pull out of my hat to show you guys, because I'm still contemplating, and it will probably depend on like holiday sales and things and which books I can get my hands on. So I told you that I was going to be able to purchase a Goodreads Choice Awards nominee, which is why I'm a little saddened that I'm not more interested in more of the fantasy list. So I'll get to those in just a minute. And then I can also purchase a favorite of the year. And I don't want to do that until the end of the year, because what if like my favorite book of all time I read before January 1st and then I want to purchase that one. So I'm going to give you guys some options, and you can give me your opinions down in the comments if you really have strong feelings on which books I should go with over the others. I'm not promising that I will follow your advice, but I always love to chat. The first thing, so the Goodreads nominee purchase, I told you guys I could go in any category and look at books that I'm interested in. So there's one that I've already read that I am interested in buying, and that is My Darling Dreadful Thing. But I've been debating whether or not that is a book that I will reread. I did really enjoy it. I think it was very eerie and creepy and slow and a beautiful story. I just don't know if I'm ever going to get back to it. And so I've been debating in my mind whether or not I want to have it in my collection. The other 2 that I'm curious about, but I want to read prior to getting them is because you know how I am. I don't necessarily want a whole bunch of books on my shelves that I haven't read. And these 2 I am curious about, and I have them on my Libby holds. So one of them is Service Model, which is in the sci-fi section of Goodreads Choice Awards. I've heard really fun things about it, and I really want to read something by this author, and I think this might be one that's a win. So this one is really high on my list. And then the other one I'm interested in is We Used to Live Here, which I've heard nothing but good things about. It's in the horror category. It was also in the debut category. It made huge waves on Reddit, and I have been waiting like 12 weeks for the audiobook to come in on Libby. And so once I read both of those, Service Model and We Used to Live Here, I will figure out which one I want for my collection. Of course, I could purchase more than one, but those are the 3 that are kind of on my radar on purchases. And I will have a book haul probably towards the beginning of the year where I will show you guys what I purchased over the holidays and then also for this project. Now, as far as my favorites of the year goes, a lot of the books that's another reason with the Goodreads Choice Awards nominee that I could purchase. A lot of the books that I have absolutely loved that are on the Goodreads Choice Awards, I already own. And so when I'm talking about my favorites of the year as well, most of them I already own. And so as I was looking through the books that I have right now that are probably going to make the list for my favorite books of the year, there are a few that stand out that I would like to add to my collection. So one of those is Strange Beasts, which is a Sherlock Holmesian like book that features two women, the daughter of Moriarty and a woman whose name is Sam Harker, whose father has connections with Van Helsing and events that happened surrounding Dracula. And they have to solve these really gruesome murders that are happening in Paris. And it was very, very fun. So I would love to have that one in my collection. I also would love to have My Murder, which I read at the very beginning of the year, which is about a person who lives in a world where the government has figured out how to clone people. And so when people are murdered, their loved ones can essentially make it to where they petition the government to reanimate and not reanimate, because that's not the right thing, but they clone their bodies and bring their loved ones back to life. And this happens to our main character, and she actually throughout the book solves her own murder, solves who murdered her in the first place. It was very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. And I'd been waiting on it to come out in paperback for me to buy it, but it is in paperback now, so I could buy that one. A few others, which some of these are a little cheaty because they were rereads. I still do not own Mistborn in my collection. I have it on Kindle, but I don't have a physical copy, so I would like to have that entire series. I also reread Locke Lamora this year, The Lies of Locke Lamora, and I would like to own that series. I only own that on Kindle. I also am going to be reading Wind and Truth. I have it on audio right now, so I'll be reading that throughout December, and I'm sure that that's going to be a favorite of the year, and I will have that in my collection. So that might be one that I purchase. I also have the Codex Alira series. I just finished book 4, and every time I get into that series, I just dearly love the characters, and so I would love to start collecting those books as well. So I have lots of options. If you guys think that one of them is better to add to my collection over the others quickly, please let me know. I'm sure I will own all of them eventually, but I just have to kind of prioritize which ones I want to add to my collection first. Okay, next we're going to talk about some upsets, and I'm not going to talk about every single one because I know that there are a lot. But I'm just going to talk about some ones that first are very personal to me, and then I will also talk about ones that I just feel like other people are going to have some opinions on. The first one, well, actually, we'll just start with the top of the fantasy heap. So the fact that Somewhere Beyond the Sea won, I think, is probably surprising to a lot of people, especially Leigh Bardugo fans, because I think people were just thinking the Leigh Bardugo book, The Familiar, is going to be a shoo-in. But what I think probably happened, at least from what I've heard from people who do really enjoy Leigh Bardugo's works, is a lot of them have picked up The Familiar and didn't enjoy it. And so while Leigh Bardugo, I think, has more notoriety and is a bigger name than TJ Klune, I do think that this book in particular was disappointing her audience more. So I also think that TJ Klune, I'm not like discrediting their notoriety at all. I know The House in the Cerulean Sea is huge. I am a little shocked that it's the second in a series that ended up winning out over Leigh Bardugo, because the second in a series, you always have less people that read it, right? You always have less people that carry on with the series because they're the people who enjoyed the first book. And so in general, I don't think series, unless it's a huge author name, later on in the series probably don't do as well. I mean, that's kind of noted by the Deborah Harkness book, the Blackbird Oracle, that got 10th place. That's a huge series that a lot of people have dearly loved, but it's the 5th book in the series. And so I don't know if that hurts them or not. It'd be interesting. It'd be an interesting stat to look back at to see how well sequels and beyond do in series versus not standalones, but like first in the series. Another upset just for myself is The Tainted Cup. Now, The Tainted Cup did make the shortlist, but it was placed 9th in the shortlist, and I really think that this should have done better. I think this is an excellent fantasy mystery. I think it's an amazing blend of those two genres. One that I don't see very often with genre blends, especially with mystery. I feel like a lot of times the mysteries, the fantasy mysteries specifically that I've read, focus more on one or the other. And so to see one that I really truly believe is 50-50 and also super engaging, a very vast, interesting world, and it's very intellectual as well. This is a Sherlock Holmesian mystery, if you guys are not aware of what The Tainted Cup is, but it is set in a world of leviathans. And so these individuals live in a country that has these seaside scapes that have these massive walls that are meant to keep out the leviathans, because if they get on the shore, think like Godzilla, they're going to destroy everything. and the people, the engineers who are in charge of building these seawalls are being murdered, and in pretty gruesome ways. And so you follow a duo of political people within the system that have to go through and solve these mysteries. And it's fantastic. I can't wait. The sequel comes out next year, but I just wish it would have done a little bit better. The other upset that I would like to talk about in fantasy for me is A Sorceress Comes to Call. I really enjoyed this T. Kingfisher. I thought it was a lot of fun. And because of T. Kingfisher's name, I did think that it was going to do better than 12th place. So I was a little disappointed not to see it higher on the list. But it could be because it's not as well known. It's definitely not as cozy as some of T. Kingfisher's other books that have done better. But because the fact that What Feasts at Night did so well in fantasy, or not in fantasy, in horror, I was just kind of surprised that this one didn't have more votes. Okay, on to some other categories, and I'm just going to mention some things briefly that I think people are probably a little upset about. First, in Romantasy, Sarah J. Maas won, which I know nobody is shocked by, but it's just a little disappointing when you have such a discrepancy between first and second place, which I'll talk about whenever I talk about the numbers. But it's just sad to see the same author win all of the time when you have a lot of other, viable options. I'm also a little disappointed myself. This is probably not an upset at all that Apprentice to the Villain got second place, because I really didn't like the first book in that series, but maybe the Romantasy readers disagree with me on that. Similarly, in horror, we have Stephen King winning, which I thought was a little surprised, because I think that this, maybe I'm wrong. No, it is. It says this is a short story collection. So it's not really even a novel by Stephen King. And yeah, I mean, not that short story collections can't do well, but I mean, I knew as soon as Stephen King's name was on the list that he was probably going to win. And once again, it's a little disappointing, especially in this case, because the second book is a book I'm really interested in. We Used to Live Here is a book that I have heard nothing but good things about. I've heard people say that it is their favorite book of the year. I am so curious to read it, and it just would have been nice for a debut work to win the horror category. So I'm a little sad at that one as well. I'm also a little shocked, and I don't know if other people feel the same way as me. Murder Road is the fourth book. I don't know. I've never read it, but whenever it was placed in horror, I was a little confused because I thought that that would have been a thriller, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong with its placement. Okay, let's talk about the numbers really quick, because as I was looking through the winners and looking at not only the fantasy list, but all of the lists to see which people won, which ones I was shocked by, which ones I didn't expect. And then I started looking at the numbers and I just got a little curious. So I looked at the categories that I am most interested in, and I just figured out, or I just looked at how many votes the top book got in those categories. So fantasy, the top book got 69,854 votes. In sci-fi, the top book got 78,459 votes. Mystery thriller was 82,603. Horror was 60,901, and debut novels was 63,605. Romantasy came in at 122,895. The discrepancy between how many people vote in Romantasy and fantasy, I think, is very interesting, because Romantasy is a subgenre of fantasy. So you would think people who are reading Romantasy would also be reading fantasy, but apparently not. Or that maybe they're just not interested in voting in that category. So I thought that was probably the most interesting number discrepancy. Now, if we look at inside specific categories, so inside the fantasy category, the difference between the number 1 and number 2 spot was super minuscule. The number 1 spot in the fantasy category was Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which got 69,854 votes. And The Familiar, which was number 2, got 68,564 votes. That's crazy close for that many voters. And so I thought that was kind of fun to see how many people, Somewhere Beyond the Sea just eked it out. Because I know when I was making my votes, I was like, I voted for the Book of Doors, but I knew the Book of Doors wasn't going to win overall. And so I did have that thought, do I strategically vote for who I think has the possibility of beating out Leigh Bardugo, or do I vote for my heart? And I went with my heart. So I don't know. That's just something interesting to me. Now, something else I want to talk about, if we look at the debut category. So the debut category, the top novel was How to End a Love Story. And I'm looking down at my phone because I don't have these numbers written out. But this was 63,605 votes. And it was a romance novel that won. The next highest was The Ministry of Time, which was a sci-fi. And it has 44,473 votes. The difference between those, I just think is crazy. And then, so I was also going to look, I didn't write down how many votes romance. Okay, so romance in the big category, like the top spot, the top winner was 179,349 votes. So let me know your thoughts. And I know that it's not about fairness, it's all a popularity contest, but I find it's not as interesting when you start to look at the numbers when you're comparing a debut category where you are including romance books with books in the sci-fi, fantasy, horror categories that get less than half the votes that romantasy and romance do. So obviously romance was going to come out on top in that instance because more voters show up. I almost wonder if for a category that does have other categories mixed in, so a mix of genres, if they could do a percentage. So if it's a debut in fantasy and the top book in fantasy gets 69,000 votes and the top debut in fantasy got 40,000 votes, then we could find a proportion like of how many of the fantasy voters actually voted for that debut and compare the percentages. Just because then it's what percentage of the people who read the genre are actually voting for the book, which I think is just more interesting than how many people are going to vote for the book. But I know that they'll never do that because it's too complicated. And I know that not everyone who votes in fantasy also votes in debut. Not everyone who votes in romance also votes in debut. So like, I know it's not a fair percentage, but I just think it might be more fun. The other one that I wanted to look at that it was a really significant difference between first place and second place was horror. So in horror, you have the Stephen King with 60,901 votes. And then We Used to Live Here has 46,932 votes, which I think is an impressive number for a debut novel. So, I mean, that book won in my mind. But I also wonder, actually, I haven't checked this yet, how many people have actually read the Stephen King? So the Stephen King has 60,900 votes on the Goodreads Choice Awards, but the You Like It in the Dark only has 49,137 ratings on Goodreads, which I know that there are people who read it and don't rate it, but just an interesting number. Also, if we're talking about discrepancies between first and second place, we have to talk about romantasy as well, because the Sarah J. Maas has 122,895 votes, whereas Apprentice to the Villain only had 56,345 votes. Okay, looking at the Stephen King made me curious about Somewhere Beyond the Sea. You guys are just on a journey with me today about numbers. So Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which won the fantasy category, got 69,854,000 votes. But when you look at the number of ratings on Goodreads, only 57,974 people have read it or have rated it. Doesn't mean that's the only people who've read it, but that's very interesting to me. And I know that there are people who, because I don't vote for books I haven't read. And that's just a rule of mine. Which I don't care. Like if you want to vote for whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really mean anything in the long run. It's curious to me though, why I wonder if those people, actually, let's look at that. Which I know it's not super fair to compare it to House in the Cerulean Sea, because it's been out for so much longer, but ooh, yeah, it's really not fair. I was gonna say, I wonder how many people have read House in the Cerulean Sea, but currently on Goodreads, 743,263 people have rated it. So it has enough numbers that if there are people who had read the first book and really enjoyed it, they probably could vote for the second book, just knowing what the tone of the story is and the fact that they like the characters and things. So Wow, I didn't realize that it had that many ratings. Now that's something, let me know if you guys would be curious about that, because I like to tinker around with numbers, as you guys know. I like to look at the different stats and things that I can find on Goodreads and other sources. But would you be interested in looking at the number of people who are reading different genres? I've had several conversations with friends about the fact that fantasy, while it's very popular on BookTube, I think from my viewpoint, I know that there are a lot of people who read fantasy on YouTube. In my everyday life, I don't see that. There are not a lot of people I have in my everyday life that will read fantasy. However, on BookTube, I would say that there are less people who are strictly mystery readers or thriller readers. I think thriller is probably a little bit more popular than mystery, but mysteries I think are represented less with a booktuber who claims that that's like their top genre. And maybe I'm wrong. It could be that I am in the fantasy genre, and so that is what YouTube is sending my way, and those are the people that I interact with. But in my day-to-day life, mysteries are more popular, more prevalent among people that I'm around. And when I look at numbers, as far as how many people have rated books on Goodreads, that's true. There are more people who are reading mysteries than are reading fantasy. So I wonder if I should do a little bit of a deeper dive on some like really popular mystery books, really popular fantasy books, sci-fi books, and see what the numbers look like, or if that would even be interesting. Let me know in the comments if you guys are interested. Thank you for coming along with me on this really nerdy journey and kind of chaotic journey to explore the Goodreads winners this year. And if you are not feeling chatty, just leave me a little calculator or some type of calculation symbol in the comments so I know that you guys are here. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.